Is my partner ready?
Yep.
Are my opponents ready?
Yes.
All right, time starts now. Communication, the imparting or exchanging of information or news. Most communication acts around the idea of negotiating with our peers/enemies. When two people disagree with each other, do they start beating each other up? This isn't communication, this is violence. And today, like real communicators, my partner and I affirm the resolution, on balance, diplomacy is better maintained peace than military power. My first contention is that diplomacy has united many countries through trade. In 1972, Richard Nixon went to China and started a trade agreement with the country. This was a big deal since two rivaling powers of different governments were now united through one system of trade. And when you have countries like North Korea that also trade with the U.S. and China, you have a situation where if the U.S. ever bombs North Korea, which can happen, then that means that China's economy will detriment from this experience, and then the U.S. will also be affected, which means that diplomacy is now preventing these things from happening. My second contention is that diplomacy has maintained worldwide peace for the last 70 years. Ever since the United Nations was founded in 1944, there has not been any major catastrophe that all of the world is participating in. In fact, diplomatic events have been on the rise, such as the Marshall Plan, German reunification, and Reagan-Gorbachev Berlin Wall. These events have not only shown us that peace is kept, but also that diplomacy has clouded our world, and that it's because it is effective. My third contention is more of a hybrid contention. The first half is that diplomacy has created long-lasting peace agreements, and the second half is that military power has created more anti-American sentiment. Peace agreements have kept peace for a long time. For example, the Israel and Egypt peace treaty was successful in keeping peace between Egypt and Israel, and now Egypt is a partner with Israel. On the other hand, as the second half of the contention, military raids and wars have caused even more hate against America. The U.S. has tried, throughout history, the U.S. has tried so hard to shoehorn democracy into other countries in wars such as the Vietnam War, Korean War, and the Gulf War, and all of them have failed. In fact, thanks to more raids, we have more terrorist groups. ISIS started because of the insurgency created by the raid on Iraq from the U.S. Clearly, our military has made things worse. So in conclusion, because diplomacy has united many countries through trade, it has kept worldwide peace for the last 70 years, and it creates more long-lasting peace agreements and stops anti-American sentiment, my partner and I affirm the resolution, on balance, diplomacy has better maintained peace than military power. Thank you, and I urge a pro ballot.
Crossfire?
Wait a second. Yep, I'm ready. So, are my opponents ready?
Yes.
Is my judge ready? Okay, time starts.
So in your case, you mentioned the UN, correct?
Yes.
So who makes all the decisions on the United Nations? Which council?
I don't know.
The Security Council.
Yeah.
The Security Council. Now, who is in the Security Council? U.S., right? U.S.,
yeah,
China.
U.S., China, yeah, all
Russia.
major world powers.
Exactly. And why are they on the Security Council? Because they have military power. So in reality, the UN is based on military power, correct? Because everyone who's making decisions there
I don't know what you're
military
talking
power.
about right now. You're saying these are the major world powers. They are powerful, and they know how to effectively persuade others.
But okay. So you're conceding that major world powers can persuade people. And why are they major world powers? Because they have military power.
Yeah, sure they have military power, but that's not their main focus or their main goal. They have military power there just to the point. It doesn't make them any more or any less powerful.
Wait, military power does not make a country any more or less powerful?
Well, it makes them powerful enough, but rather the more diplomacy has happened, the more countries have been able to effectively.
Can you name a country that has succeeded in diplomatic relations yet has absolutely no military power?
I don't. No, move on.
Okay, so you mentioned something about the U.S. attacking North Korea, but doesn't this just link onto our side because we have
This
deterrence?
isn't. What I was
military
making
power?
an example is that diplomacy through trade has stopped many things like this. If the U.S., North Korea, and China were not connected through trade, and we had this current problem that we have now, then a situation like that would happen. But because trade has united these countries, that prevents.
So you're saying that there would be conflict without the diplomatic relations, correct?
Yeah, there would be a much bigger conflict if we hadn't had this diplomacy.
But wouldn't there not be conflict simply because of the deterrence involved with weapons in the
No. The reason we don't have a conflict right now, the reason North Korea is not.
So, is anyone not ready? Okay. So, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Now, hello, I'm Dan Choi, and we are arguing the concept of resolve. On balance, diplomacy has better maintained peace than military power. We define military power as the resources that a nation-state can mobilize against other nation-states for purposes of military deterrence, defense, and war, according to encyclopedia.com. We note that even if we don't prove that military power provides more solvency than diplomacy, we still win because if we prove that diplomacy depends on military power. Contention 1. Military power is a precedent of diplomacy. According to James Jeffrey, senior ambassador to Iraq, it was the threat of military force, ironically, that got to the chemical weapons agreement. That is how the world works. You cannot separate diplomacy from military force. Harris 2016 corroborates this, saying a well-appointed military improves diplomacy with adversaries, strengthens our alliances, signals credibility and resolve, deters aggression, and enhances national morale. Furthermore, Napoleon, Frederick the Great, and Earl Grey all credit that diplomacy without force is like an orchestra without its instruments. All these sources point to the one fundamental idea that military power is a precedent to diplomacy. Military power is the base that allows diplomacy to work. Therefore, without us, their positive impacts do not exist. U.S. has had successful diplomacies only because of its great military power and global influence. This overpowering presence gives the other nations a reason to engage in negotiations, while just diplomacy doesn't give any reason at all. Look to Jeffrey again, who cites the example of President Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger. I saw them do major groundbreaking diplomatic initiatives that were revolutionary, but those guys were deploying military forces as an integral part of their diplomacy, Jeffrey said. That is why they were successful in their diplomacy, and I don't see any difference between the two negotiating agreements and threatening force and, when necessary, delivering on the threat. With a strong military backing diplomatic policies, a nation capable of reacting conventionally or even threatening to do so, while at the same time prepared to defend and counter unilateral actions of misadventure, the government will be in a position to stick to its foreign policy of seeking dialogue from the position of strength. It will not need to oscillate from one approach to another every time there's a terrorist strike. In the world we inhabit today, it is the powerful and strong nations that others listen to. Look to U.S., China, and Russia. They all have strong military power, which is why they are able to have this influence. Attention to economy. Military power benefits the economy. There are multiple pathways by which investments in military hard power produce economic benefits. The world economy is deeply agreed and dependent of each other. We need access to markets, and in order for those markets to be accessible, we need a strong military that will intervene if necessary in order to keep those markets secure. The Middle East was and currently is often ruled by a dictator. With a lack of check and balances to control the dictator, they can do whatever they want, little to no opposition, and as they can do often to silence these oppositions. Diplomacy wouldn't have stopped Iraq invading Kuwait in 1990, and military intervention was necessary to protect our allies in Kuwait. If we did not intervene in Saddam would have set a trigger which would lead to severe damage to the world economy, a weakened U.S. position in the world stage, etc. Dictators need to be controlled. Military intervention will help control them. Dictators will not comply with just military. Military power protects the economy from others, and without it, the economy of countries can decrease and become weaker than ever before. The impact is that military power helps that economy to grow stronger, and that can benefit its own country. Diplomacy therefore, military power helps the economy, and I urge approval.
Time will start now. So you were talking about in your second contention about how military helps for like the economy, the world economy, right?
Yes.
So for when you talk about also for for Sudan, how would the economy become weaker?
Well, we're just talking about different instances where diplomacy fails and ultimately leads to severe damage on the world economy. The Sudan was set off a trigger that would have led to severe damage if not for military intervention.
Why would Sudan trigger?
Like the situation in Sudan.
Why would it trigger hurting the world economy?
Because military intervention is necessary in order to have these influences against other nations. And without that influence, we would have had a catastrophe on the world economy. If we just focus on diplomacy, everything would be gone bad.
Why? If it's diplomacy, isn't that peaceful? Which is what our resolution is talking about, how it causes more peace.
But military power also causes peace because it prevents aggression from other nations and also like suppresses them and ultimately causes more peace than diplomacy does. And besides, if diplomacy fails, so much bad things can happen.
So
while
basically,
in our side, even if military power will fail, even though it won't, we still have that safety net in case of any miscalculations or
what
anything.
my partner was talking about, and I believe his third contention about how now people like in the Middle East kind of like don't really like Americans because they're bombing all these countries in the Middle East. Don't you think that's causing more war than peace?
Well, actually, if we look at several examples of,
All right, this is I believe your tax speech, correct?
Yeah, we'll take some prep time. We'll just time this. Hello, Judge. My name is Drew Pye, and I'll be doing the attack speech for the con side of this debate. So let's start by looking at their first point about, essentially about communication diplomacy. So an essential thing that both sides have been advocating for is that they keep saying that diplomacy is peace and military power isn't. But I would like to say that this is not true because military power provides an effective deterrence against threats and conflict. So actually, we have more peace. And if you look to World War I and World War II, the failed diplomacy after World War I is what caused World War II. So in reality, diplomacy is the one that is shattering peace. And then moving on, I went on to talk about communications and negotiations, but first I would like to say that communications are not possible if countries don't feel safe, and they need to feel safe, which is why we're using military power. And then they went on to talk about trade and the economy. So first of all, countries are only willing to trade if they feel safe, and they might not even be willing to trade if they don't stand anything to gain. And so that's where military power comes in as an essential bargaining chip that can enhance trade, and so therefore we win on this trade impact. And then they also went on to say that if there wasn't these trade relations, which we've already won on, then the U.S. could attack North Korea. Well, first of all, because of deterrence from military weapons, this is not happening. This is just infeasible because U.S. knows if it attacks, it'll get attacked back, and with just the same amount of force because of nuclear weapons. And then they went on to talk about the UN, and I pushed them on this in Crossfire. The UN is, the people who make decisions on the UN is the Security Council. What is the Security Council made of? Countries who have hard power. Look to Russia, look to the U.S., look to China. They are the ones who determine the fate. And even then, even if they say that UN is purely diplomatic, first of all, we looked at it's made no success in the past few decades. Look at terrorism, it hasn't been able to solve that. Look to Iraq and Afghanistan, it hasn't been able to solve that. Then they went on to say Israel and Egypt have a successful peace treaty, but we would like to note that this was because the U.S. backed up Israel with military power, which is the only reason why Egypt came to the table. This just goes back to our own point, how you need military power in order to bring people to the table and enforce diplomatic ties. And then moving on, they also talked about terrorism. So first of all, terrorism is actually on our side because they coded ISIS, but notice the thing that's making ISIS surrender and die off now is military power. We're the ones solving for this. Diplomacy does not solve for terrorism. Terrorism has, because they're so widespread, there's no reason to listen to diplomacy, and even if diplomacy was used, it wouldn't be effective on them. And they went on to talk about worldwide peace, that diplomacy was creating worldwide peace. Well, first of all, I would like to note a contradiction because they said that there was a lot of conflict happening, anti-American sentiment and things like that. But if there's really worldwide peace, then none of this would be happening. And then so they also went on to say that so the anti-American sentiment was actually caused by failed diplomatic policy in the Middle East. And notice that we're the ones who are actually solving for this because we're the ones who are taking care of the problem. Therefore, I strongly urge a con ballot. Thank you for your time.
So this is cross-examination.
Okay, 1 minute.
All right, wait 2 minutes.
3, 2,
So, go. So, I heard you say that military power provides deterrence, correct?
Yes, correct.
Did you know that's also diplomacy?
No, diplomacy.
Yes, it is. It's coercive diplomacy. Coercive diplomacy.
Wait, coercive diplomacy. You can't have coercive diplomacy if you don't have military power.
Yeah, and here in.
Wait, you just said yes. Do
You know
concede the
what?
point?
All right, let's move on. So you said that. That military power enhances trade, correct?
Yes.
How does it do that?
Well, basically, first of all, no one is going to trade with a country with which they don't feel safe, right? If they don't feel safe, they're not trading with them, right? But if you had military power, even if trade negotiations break down, you have a safety
now tell
net
me,
to fall
does anybody
back on.
feel safe from North Korea? Tell me, does anybody think that we can just go to North Korea and it'll be like safe? You know, it's a great tourist attraction and stuff. Is that do you think anybody believes that?
Oh, what do you mean? North Korea is not going to attack.
Wow, tell me, do you think people are scared of North Korea?
Yes,
Why?
because of the aggressive rhetoric of Kim Jong-un.
Yes, and specifically, what is causing that? What does Kim Jong-un have that is making people scared?
Actually, so I think you're trying to get at nuclear bombs, correct? But the reason they have nuclear bombs is because of diplomacy. If you look to the Sunshine Policy, which was enacted a couple years before that, we essentially gave them money to fund their dictatorship. So as you can see, diplomacy sometimes, actually most of the times, it can actually fuel dictatorship.
Yes, and okay.
Wait,
and
you said yes again.
No. Okay, so another question I have is that you said that military power enhances our economy, but can you provide a little more on that?
Well, basically, we're essentially saying that when you develop military power, it stimulates the economy and increases.
And did you know that the money to fund a military airplane can be used to hire like 100,000 diplomats? Okay, that's time.
Time will start now. Okay, so first of all, they say how military power will help the economy. But first of all, during the Cold War, when there was an arms race, this really hurt our economy. And it also hurt the Russians so much that it made them go bankrupt. So obviously military power is not going to help the economy. And also, Kim Jong-un's military or nukes have caused fear, which, like they said, if they're scared, then they're not going to really do trading. And that's why also economic growth has been going down, because people are scared with, like, South Korea. Let's say their currency is going down because people feel like they can't really do anything with them because they're afraid that they're going to get nuked. If there wasn't any military power for North Koreans, then South Korea's currency might be going up right now. So their military power being able to help markets is completely false. And also, a quote by Hans Morgenthau, he said, "Effective diplomacy employs the power of persuasion, compromises at the right time and on the right issues, and when necessary uses the threat of military force." So diplomacy, so what he's saying is diplomacy, military power, they have the right to use that in that. So that's part of diplomacy. That's what he's saying right there. And he's an international relations expert, so he's a very credible source. So that also cuts at their first contention when they try to say military power is helps diplomacy. And for all those reasons, I urge pro ballot.
Well, you talked about how North Korea is threatening with nuclear weapons, right?
What do you mean?
Or like the nuclear weapons is causing a decrease in the economy?
Yes.
Well, didn't my partner already said that this is because of failed diplomacy on Sunshine Policy? because that allowed them to proliferate their weapons since we just basically gave $500 million to them?
What do you mean?
Because what I'm trying to get to is that the NK threat is because of failed diplomacy, while we are solving for that because we're suppressing them with military. So we're solving for it, and your side is just making it worse. Also, can I ask another question?
Sure.
Where's your link to military power causes arms race? Could you provide a link? Because you stated no.
What do you mean a
evidence.
link? Do you mean like?
Like, how does military power lead to arms race?
Okay, so basically, remember in the Cold War when everybody started building, or America and the USSR or the Soviet Union started building up nuclear bombs, correct? Right?
Well,
I just want to make sure you're agreeing. Okay. So basically, because they're building up all these arms, one country wants to be better than the other country because they want to feel that they're more powerful. And then because they keep trying to build more nuclear bombs to feel more powerful, that's
actually,
why
military power actually
didn't
suppresses them from doing these things, while diplomacy makes them.
then why did Russia sorry, it's your question.
So. So how do you solve for economy on your side of this debate?
Economy, like my partner stated in, I believe one of his first contentions, if there's good communication between the two, which will make them
good
feel
communication is only a result of being safe, as my partner said, and in order to make those other nations to feel safe.
But why
we
would
need
they
to have
feel
a
safe
military-
if like they are under threat of being bombed, basically?
All right, I believe this is my defense speech, correct?
Yes.
Can we take 30 seconds of prep time? All right, time starts now. So I want to begin this defense speech by asking you, Judge, the following question. Imagine if instead of us debating on diplomacy and military power, instead we had a battle royale where we just fought each other because we disagreed with one side or the other. This is an analogy to diplomacy and military power, and effectively, I believe that I have successfully been able to explain my contentions and defend them. My opponents have barely said anything to my first contention, which is that many countries are united through trade. In fact, I've been able to successfully state that that because of this trade agreement, there's no chance that we'll ever go to war with countries like North Korea and China because we trade with them. Our economies are successful from them. And for my second contention, I've successfully been able to state how the United Nations has provided peace for the last 70 years, and all my opponents have stated is that it's made up of large powers that have a strong military. While that is true, however, these countries aren't here for the purposes of military. They're here. The United Nations is here because we care about peace, and so these large, important countries are able to effectively use diplomacy and communicate with these countries. Then, for my third contention, all they've stated is that. All they've stated so far for anti-American sentiment is that diplomacy is that terrorism is bad and that diplomacy doesn't work. But the military is but as I've clearly been able to state, the military is what created these terrorist groups in the first place. Without military power intervening, we wouldn't have ISIS. And without the military power, without the U.S. military power intervening to shoehorn democracy into Korea, we wouldn't be having this problem in the first place. In fact, after the Vietnam War, South Vietnam and North Vietnam united itself under. And for these reasons, I urge a pro ballot.
No. First off, my opponent talked about North Korea and how the nuclear weapons are causing a threat. However, this is due to the failed diplomacy of Sunshine Policy, which caused $500 million, as I said, to let them proliferate their own weapons. And plus, we're providing solvency for this because military power is actually preventing them from attacking. The only reason why North Korea isn't attacking is because of our military presence in South Korea. That also goes on to our point on economy. Without a safety net, on our side, we have a safety net with military power, but they don't. And so we clearly overweigh on economy because we provide solvency with a safety net when they don't. They also talked about how they admitted coercive diplomacy, which is going on our side, because coercive diplomacy relies on military power, and they didn't respond to our point on how military power is the president of diplomacy. We've showed you multiple times, Judge, that the only reason why diplomacy works is because of military power. This also links to the point on UN, because the UN is a form of diplomacy that was made from the security councils that include USA, Russia, and China, which all are huge military power nations and have huge influence in globally. And and also we've already shown many examples of how UN doesn't work, like Iraq, Afghanistan, terrorism, and North Korea. Also, they talk about arms race. However, look to the Cold War. Although there was a growing arms race, there was 0 people who died due to nuclear weapons. This shows that arms race has no impact. And also, even if it has impact, diplomacy fails to solve anything in arms race. While look to Vietnamese arms race and North Korea-China arms race. Diplomacy fails to solve while we provide solvency. Also, they talked about ISIS and terrorism. However, this is caused by religious tensions, which and not is related to military power at all. Therefore, I urge a comment.
No. Okay. So they keep saying that about terrorism and how it's because of failed diplomacy, but there's ISIS because there was a threat of military power, because America just started bombing the Middle East because they didn't like the leaderships, and then people started hating the U.S. for this in the Middle East, and which is going also with my partner's case, which is saying that now people are going against America, like they don't really like America. And they also, for their second contention, I've already said that Kim Jong-un is causing fear, which is losing a lot of countries a lot of money, like Vietnam, South Korea, like Hyundai, the car company. They support Vietnam with like a lot of trucks. And now because Korea's economy is going down, now Vietnam's economy is going down. And if Vietnam's economy goes down, other nation economies could go down, which is bad for the whole economy, which is completely going against their case. And also, go back to my partner's defense case, where he said if we didn't debate, we'd be having a battle royale instead of a debate. So I think we should have diplomacy because it causes more peace. And also, so without military power, there would be no terrorism, which is a main threat. And without military presence or like power, things like that, Kim Jong-un wouldn't be causing all this economy going down. And for all those reasons, I also urge a pro ballot.
Ready? So, time starts in 3, 2, 1, go. So, hello, Judge. I'll just be going over the main voting issues. And so first, I would like to talk about how you should weigh this round, and that's based on solvency. Whichever side can solve the problems better wins this debate. And so let's start with the first point that they dropped early in this debate, coercive diplomacy. In the crossfire, they essentially admitted that military power can be used as a precedent for diplomacy. So therefore, since you need military power to have diplomacy, any argument they make for diplomacy is also weighed onto our side, because you can't have effective diplomacy without military power. And they themselves said that effective diplomacy contains a lot of things, and so therefore, in order to have those good things, you need to have military power. And then moving on, they went to talk. One of the biggest clashes is economy in this debate. And so economy, we already said that no one's going to trade if they're not safe. And the only way they can feel safe is if they have the safety net of military power. That's the only way. And then the only response to this is they keep bringing up North and South Korea and their conflict. But so first, once again, look at solvency. Diplomacy didn't do anything. Well, last time they used sunshine policy, it had no solvency. It literally gave money to North Korea to fund their nuclear weapons program. And the only thing that's stopping them now is the U.S. military presence in South Korea. We are the only sole deterrent, which is the next big clash, deterrence. And so we've already proven that there will not be conflict under a world with military power, simply because countries know that attacking another country would be suicide because of the deterrence value of military power. And then moving on, we already won on the UN point. They didn't really have much of a refutation of this. We already said that the UN is made up of some of the strongest military power. So therefore, even if it works, it's only because of military power. And then, so terrorism is one last big clash. And so, once again, solvency, they have none. And we are actually making ISIS go down. And we already said it's caused by religious issues. And so, at the end of the day, they have no solvency for any of the problems that they bring up. So therefore, I strongly urge a con ballot. Thank you for your time.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Billy.